term locality plans, but what's going to come in terms of the wider community's engagement, and getting some communications out there to our community, what our ask is and how we're representing them.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Walker?
I just wanted to ask about the process of information and intelligence coming from the response unit into the recovery unit around the understanding of the event and the extent of impact, and what's the process for handover of that intelligence? Has it just come from group office or from local EOCs as well to paint the picture of what we're recovering from? Can you just talk to me about the process that's been gone through for that?
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, so at the moment, the sit rep, and I think that's what you were talking about, that was our last sit rep that was sent, because the response now has basically, NEMA hasn't been activated for a number of weeks now. So that was purely on the residual response matters that we were dealing with. It wasn't meant to cover the whole recovery piece, but I think there needs to be, and I'm not part of the recovery structure, but there needs to be reporting around the recovery process. There needs to be some outcomes, etc., identified which are reported against, and so I think that's a key piece of work for the new regional and local recovery officers to actually do that and come up with that reporting process.
So Madam Chair, wasn't really talking about that, Ian. What I was interested in is specifically the intelligence that's been collected by group.
Yep.
During the response, in terms of the extent of damage and what we're recovering from, the process of sharing that into the recovery office, and whether that's just been at a regional level or whether there's been a process to local EOCs and intelligence mapping as well, or has it all come through your office?
No, it's all been, it's across the whole system.
Okay.
And that was part of the transition to recovery report, which we wrote. So that it was a snapshot in time, obviously.
Yeah.
And then, so that was passed over to the recovery manager. And then from then on, that intelligence gathering and reporting technically is the responsibility of the recovery processes, or sorry, recovery structures, I should say.
I have a concern that we've got gaps in information, and it crosses into how we're going to do review as well as how we transition to recovery. But actually understanding the impacts from the north to the south and the east to the west of the region, and how it's understood and gathered as a narrative, both in terms of how the event unfolded, but then also the impacts that we're all having to deal with. And we haven't got there yet, and I'm just trying to grapple with, is it going to go through the review? Is it going to come through work we need to commission in the recovery group? And I'm just trying to figure out where we need to make sure that happens. So thank you for the answer.
Okay. Would it provide further comfort to have eyes over some of that work? Is that a suggestion that you're making?
I think an understanding of the process of where and how the intelligence has been gathered and put together into a place, because I just was thinking of, I'm struggling to see the story of impact and the story of impact in Central Hawke's Bay. I'm struggling to see in much of the regional narrative, so I'm trying to figure out where to see that in the process, and I think it's probably going to come in the response, the recovery structure and how we're gathering information through the locality plans. But if that's where it needs to come from, I need to make sure that my people are building that into the locality plans. It hasn't been clearly described that it needs to be there, but if it does, I need to make sure that we do that to make sure that our impacts are covered and understood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
But just through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to just take that clarification through back to Ms. Brooking, particularly in the locality plan.
Thank you.
Well, so,
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? No? Thank you. If there are none, can I please have a mover and a seconder to receive the paper and the report? Thank you, Mayor Hazelhurst, and second, Mayor Walker. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carry. Thank you very much. We have our next item, the Cyclone Gabrielle Transitional Update. Who would like to lead us in that? Thank you, Dan. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi, Chair. Kia ora koutou. So the Transitional Update paper is produced for information. I'll present on some of the key headings of the activities that the Emergency Coordination Centre has been undertaking whilst under transition period, and then hand over to Doug to present some of the items for the operational review. So essentially, just running through these headings, the handover from response to recovery structures happens through that transition report, and then I can confirm that that happens at the regional level to the recovery agency, and also individually between each locality's emergency operations centre and the associated local recovery team, with a golden thread, I guess, going through of the locally delivered, regionally coordinated approach, working through both response and recovery. The handover to isolated community resupplies. So essentially the Emergency Coordination Centre was undertaking work at the regional level because of the complexity at the time in terms of the isolation impacts of communities. So we were working with multi-agency teams, especially probably of note here is the Defence Force, to essentially deliver groceries to people who couldn't make it into the supermarket, as well as meeting other needs. So this handover process is working from the regional level where it's existed, and during the response back to the local level, with that again kaupapa of locally delivered and led and regionally coordinated. The work in terms of demobilising the Emergency Coordination Centre, as well as the associated structures at the regional level that were set up in order to respond to the emergency, such as the distribution centre at the Tomoana Showgrounds and the Bridgepay Aerodrome. We had a footprint there. So closing these down in a way that means that we can stand them back up rapidly and effectively has been a planning effort over the last period, and that sort of leads us on to the emphasis on re-escalation planning. So particularly while we have periods of sensitivity to rainfall during winter, but then onwards from there, the resilience building and implications, and also now the sort of new vulnerabilities that communities have, and understanding what they are and how we're going to respond in a re-escalated type of scenario, whether that be through rain or through a concurrent hazard. And I think we had a good reminder of that with our earthquake in Parongaho, as a real key line of effort for the Group Coordination Centre and the Seeding Group Office. The impacts for our office are significant. The work program from before the cyclone will now need to be superseded with what the current priorities are. So an amount of business planning for what does our new normal look like in terms of our priorities, and how we're continuing to maintain some activities in terms of supply chain and a heightened level of readiness, whilst also resting staff, while also making sure that we can respond to the escalating or re-escalation if required, is an important piece of work that we need to do. And then lastly from me, before I hand over to Doug, would be we've had an incredible opportunity through this response to build relationships with people that we normally wouldn't have as much time with. So maintaining those in a way is a really key component, and something that we intend to put effort in. I think this, from our response in the Emergency Coordination Centre, this was really underpinned a lot of our wins, is the relationships, and I think is a key strength in Hawke's Bay. So we intend to maintain those. So now just hand to Mr. Tate to take you through the rest of the paper.
Thank you, Idan. So just this next section talks publicly to the operational review from Cyclone Gabrielle that the Joint Committee have committed to community to undertaking, and ensuring that there is obviously an appropriate level of independence that occurs through the review. To date, the services of Simplexity have been procured, and that's primarily at this stage around just project management support to develop for us the terms of reference. So certainly at this point there is no intention that Simplexity will carry on and actually undertake the review. It's about purely just project management support in terms of how we develop the terms of reference. Just also noting that there is a publicly excluded item on this agenda that we are proposing as publicly excluded, and that's for the ability for joint committee members to have free and frank discussion in a environment that will allow, obviously, again, free and frank discussion and the ability to talk in a matter that may protect the privacy of persons. So again, just noting that that is also forms part of the agenda. At this time as well, just noting in terms of kind of key steps of review, we are about 75% of the draft that's included in the public excluded agenda. We have had, at this stage, a very limited feedback from mana whenua in particular, with the plan that in terms of next steps, it goes from initially this joint committee meeting through back to TKO for their wider review and input as mana whenua organisations. There's some other entities we just need to check in with as well in terms of FENS and how the connections are made, with the aim that this is brought back to this table as quickly as we can. Look, I again probably really acknowledge that transparency and visibility is critical to the long-term success of the review, and we just want to make sure, particularly as we work through what is the establishment of the terms of reference, we are looking to capture and make sure that we are really looking to make sure we set the process up for success, both in terms of a governance structure, but also capturing the needs of the community in that same mix as well. Just a note there in paragraph 29 that yes, the review is proposed to be regional in nature, but certainly an expectation that local authorities will be doing their own reviews as well as our partner agencies, and particularly in this view of who is the civil defence group, which is actually all of us. All of us as partners and local authority organisations, plus mana whenua partners and other community organisations that feed into it. So a particularly important part of the review is going to be about how do we join up what are the local inputs and the local reviews into the regional review as well. Currently proposing 4 phases, and that's outlined in the table under bullet point 31. The dates are just draft dates, just noting those, but again, as we work through the next item, happy to take feedback on those. And also just noting that there is, under bullet point, what is 32 and 33, just at this point, no real clarity yet on what any national review will be, but just noting that whatever work we do in terms of the regional review will need to feed into both the national review as well. So happy to take any questions, Madam Chair. On that.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for producing a comprehensive paper, the thoughtfulness in terms of phasing of the review, and obviously we have a public excluded discussion. That is very important, that the timing, the pace, the key partners, stakeholders will be involved at the right time alongside our community as the review progresses. So thank you very much. Do we have questions for Doug at this stage, committee members? Councillor Walker. Sorry.
Can I just ask a question of Idan first before I move to the review piece?
Yes.
Just Idan, in point number 10 in the report that talks about the early recovery planning, developing holistic impacts and consequence analysis of Cyclone Gabrielle, a transition to recovery report used in the standing up of the Regional Recovery Agency. Is that an operational report that has been created and handed over to the agency? Is it possible for us to see that?
There should be no reason it's not publicly accessible. And I would, yes.
Might
yes, please,
help with my understanding of the impacts. Thank you. That would be really helpful. And then my next question is about process. And I particularly want to talk about independence, and Mr. Tate spoke about this, where we've got this group, simplicity, that are scoping the terms of reference, but then they're not necessarily the ones that will do the review. Can we just hear about the process of who will then decide who does the review and test the independence, and where does that decision sit and where does it sit in the process?
Thanks, Mr. Tate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So look, certainly my expectation is that it will come back to this table to define how ultimately who will lead the review. So within the kind of draft terms of reference as a proposed governance structure, and again, depending on where we land with that, it may well be it's seeking some guidance on potentially who within that kind of project governance group, again, who may they may have some recommendations on that, and particularly it may need to speak to, what are the types of skills that we need, what are the key issues that are identified in the review, which will ultimately really inform, who may lead the review. So, but very clearly in my mind, it's coming back to this table ultimately, where the ultimate accountability sits to endorse and approve who will lead the review.
Thank you.
So that means the end of phase 1, which is terms of reference, independent review framework, stakeholder engagement plan. That'll come to us again before it moves into the June phase.
Yes, that's the intent.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Any other questions? Comments? Mayor Hazelhurst, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. I am worried about the timeline. I think it is too drawn out. I think that the procurement of the project management needs to be given some urgency, and I think that yes, our stakeholder engagement needs to happen, but it needs to move at pace. And I'm really concerned that we are not bringing this back to our community until late in the year. So I think that we need to revisit the timelines, and we need to have a project team round this review, so we get this started and underway, and that's what a community is asking us to do. So I think that we need to move at pace to get that procurement up and running, and the stakeholder engagement. And I would like to have thought that it could be all brought back to us as soon as possible in May. We know who's out there. There are a very limited amount of people that can actually do this work and do it well, that know the Act and civil defence and reviews, and so we just need to get on with it. And so I'd like that as an action, please. And my other comment and question is around the relationships built during the response and the resilience building that Edan's talked about. This is absolutely critical now. We've got one opportunity from this disaster to actually capture how we rebuild and how we've got community leadership right across the region who have stood up through this. And so I'd like to understand, how are we building that resilience, and how are we going to maintain those relationships that we have built during this time, and what does that look like? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Tate, would you like to respond, and then Mr. Pickle?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. So look, feedback certainly on timelines are noted, and I think everybody agrees there's absolute urgency to want to get it, and just noting that it is a draft timeline. So again, well noted and well heard, and we'll certainly be considering that. Probably just the second point around input, and again, we have a further report that's there. Probably also noting again, as we kind of describe what is the civil defence group, and about where the feedback opportunities also sit at a local level. So, like, I can certainly speak for my own organisation and community, where as part of our kind of recovery planning, I know a very similar situation in Wairoa, where some of that early feedback has started to be gathered. So it's also recognising that there will need to be some opportunities for local community input as well, in a much larger kind of recovery sense as well. So yeah, no, certainly noted. Thank you.
Mr. Pickle?
Yeah, just I suppose a question for Ian, and it's really around the section around the business planning for the new normal, and I'm thinking about conversations that we've had around this table about the assurance around the level of resourcing and financing of a group civil defence function. And so I suppose I'm interested, if I reflect back, that you're not fully staffed. Fully staffed, you have 14 staff, you have 8 staff, that, you're identifying issues around, we're going to be in a review phase. Some really important things that the Joint Committee signed off around a capability review that you're signalling needs to carry on. There's a whole lot of work around re-escalation planning for further events, and I didn't know how to read the paper that sort of says within available budgets, and I guess I'm interested in understanding what planning assumptions are being made around the level of resourcing in a context for civil defence where you're not fully staffed. There's business as usual. There's a whole lot of new business, and to some of the points raised by the mayors, I think some of the, conscious that we're talking a lot about response and recovery. but the other R is around, readiness and resilience. And I guess I'm just interested in the view of where things currently sit around resourcing and the assumptions that are being made going into annual plans and how we finance and fund group civil defence.
Kia ora, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have got a conversation with Susie Young next week to talk about this and resourcing moving forward. There's some immediate resourcing requirements because the next 6 months to a year we are still sort of tidying up from the response and all of the, we've got equipment everywhere, we've got invoices coming in, so there's that. I think though that as part of, and I signalled it to my team yesterday, we had a bit of a session yesterday, is that we are going to have to now start looking at, well, what does the future look like, and what resourcing do we need, and then this review will also inform that as well. So that's part of the issue.
I suppose my question, Ian, is about, there's the kind of medium term, but the now stuff, like, we are, through our normal processes, we're adopting annual plans and making decisions about funding for the 1st of July onwards. Again, I stand to be corrected. I'm relying on my memory. Some of the conversations we've had around this table previously, we don't have a lot of reserves. We have regional council on behalf of all of us that basically rate on our behalf. And I suppose I'm interested around the now decisions in terms of the level of resourcing that you need for the picture that you painted in this report. And then again, on behalf of Joint Committee, does that come back to this committee to have a view into that? So I'm just really interested in the resourcing piece relative to the picture that you're painting.
To be honest, I mean, we've just been in response mode, and as I said, I haven't really started to think about that until now. And so basically, I think though, and it was a discussion I actually had with Mayor Walker before this, agree that this is one opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to, and there needs to be resourcing to be able to do that. And at the moment, I just don't have that resourcing. So the other question is how do I get you all around the table so that we can have a conversation around this stuff, and then I can go to the regional council and ask for the additional funding. So I think we talked about possibly doing some workshops or something similar, and actually sort of what is it that you want us to do, and then I can then look at, well, what is it actually going to cost us and what is the resourcing that we're going to need to do that. That's really where I'm at the moment, I'm afraid. It's just, and the runway is getting shorter and shorter, I know that, with the annual plan, and that's why I've got that meeting next week with Susie as well, with the CFO of the Regional Council.
Yeah, I think what might be helpful is within these papers some sort of financial implications or updates, particularly with the major activities. So this review will have a significant impact on the resourcing, and it will have to be sourced from somewhere. So I think a formal way of representing financial situation would be through these papers as a start. Yep. So if we can embed that in a public-facing way. Obviously, these papers go out to the public, but it also start to give us a steer on where we're at in terms of financial resources that is needed by the group. And it gives visibility also to the mayors, to our local authorities and to the regional council on the forecasting going forward. So if we can have that type of information embedded, that would be fantastic as a start. Now your suggestion of a workshop, I will liaise with Doug and the committee members around the timing of such workshop, given that, yes, annual plans are going to be adopted very soon. And whether the timing's right for that, if needed, and if we have the right information to make those decisions. Yep. Thank you. Mayor Walker.
Through you, Madam Chair. It is a topic that we've talked about before and before this response. And I think that what I want to get across is that responsibility to talk about getting the budget and the rate and how that goes through the regional council is the collective responsibility of this committee. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to we've talked about this in the past of how do we get a budget to this table where we endorse that this is the ask to the regional council about how the regional rate is set, because I think we get confusion about whether it's the regional council's job to decide what the rate should be or whether it's our job to decide what the rate would be and regional council does it on our behalf. I don't know that we've quite got that clear, and so we do need the information to come to the table so that we can work that through. That would be really helpful, and I know also it will fill into, we're all at a local level thinking about and putting in our budgets around what additional resourcing is needed now, and even what Mayor Sandra just said before about those community networks and relationships, is that we're actually holding a lot of those networks and relationships, and we're resourcing to look after them. So we need to get clear on how we're going to do that together.
Thank you. Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments from this item?
Through you, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
I support everything that's been said, but I just want to understand first and foremost the immediate need. And when I think about, and I'm very supportive of a workshop going forward and what we need in the future, that our community at the moment are both in response and in recovery, and they are looking at for leadership through our civil defence group. And in terms of just, maintaining and building those relationships and understanding what that looks like and for long-term resilience, and while we're all doing it ourselves within our own councils, there is that expectation from the community that there is a team of civil defence that is going to help us through what needs to be done. So I think that we need both the long-term strategy and what funding requirements are needed, but we also need the short-term, and for you to be operating with only 8 people, I think that's the immediate that we need to be thinking about. I know that you've lost people because I know some of the people you've lost. And the response has been enormous, and we need to acknowledge the amount of work that's gone on. And we do burn people out, and there's no question about that. So I think that we need to look at the immediate need as well as the long-term need, and I want to acknowledge the incredible hard work of the group through this response time. And through all those, we've been into all our communities for the last 10 and a half weeks, and just know the enormity of this job, both response and recovery. So I'd like to have an immediate understanding of what we need to get back to 14 people, and as we manage this next step of this response and recovery, and then look at the long-term well-being of our regional civil defence organisation.
Yes, thank you, and great point. I think if we do that in a workshop, that we have that quickly, that we look at the immediate and the long-term financing and resourcing. So if I can ask the members that be a priority when a workshop is set very quickly, so that we can address those needs in a workshop setting.
And how we support group too.
And how we support group. Yep, all of those components. Thank you.
Agreed, manage the shortfall that we have at the moment.
Ian? Yep. Very good.
That's fine. No. Yeah, as I said, I suppose that the only issue for us, and I'm just going to raise this, is that we are still sort of transitioning out of the response, even though officially we've closed the GCC as of today. There is still a whole lot of stuff that is ongoing and supporting the councils with your communities that are still isolated, etc.
Yes.
And plus, I've got to manage my staff, their leave and their well-being, and they're tired. And I've told them November is they need to take leave. So all of those little things, leadership things, need to be just factored.
So through you, Madam Chair, that is urgent. The tiredness, the leave. For the team, this is absolutely critical now that the well-being of the team is looked after.
Absolutely.
I actually wonder whether, through you, Madam Chair, it's actually something that is impacting all of our organisations.
Right.
And so the natural request, generally how this would work, is that if group is tapped and needs additional resource, you look into the TAs and say who can step up and support. But all our councils are absolutely tapped for exactly the same reasons, and so it's almost like we need to look like we are in a state of emergency again. Back to how can we ask NEMA around how can we get some skills and expertise brought into the region to help with that capacity as well. because we need something immediately, because we can't supply it from the bottom. We're going to have to find some other way to supply it from the outside.
Ian?
Yeah, so this is a recovery issue.
Yes.
And I think, so I think, some of that resourcing around the recovery needs to be put into this sort of like the community relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's, at the moment, my feeling is we're not quite hand in glove yet between the group office and the recovery structures yet, because I think there's still a fair bit of working out as to how that actually is going to work, and the funding is an issue around that. So I think that to me is something that we need to work on. So I think some of these issues that you're raising actually could be funded and could be supported, obviously supported by us, but funded through the recovery process as well. So I just want to raise that.
Can I just address the concern for needing support for your team and being able to ask again if those expertise can come back into the region? So I think that's what's been requested. Is that possible? And
I can definitely
urgency.
Talk to Nima. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely talk to Nima, but again, the system overall is pretty tapped out at the moment. I mean, we've had Auckland, we've had Northland. The system overall in New Zealand Inc. is under stress and strain at the moment. But definitely, I can ask the questions.
Thank you, Ian. Any other questions? Great. If there are none, we are going to, and I'll recommend that we head into subcommittee due to the quorum. Craig Little is stuck and he does not have an alternate. So what I suggest is we move into subcommittee, we resolve to do that, then we can continue the meeting and then the recommendations from the new subcommittee can go to the next committee meeting to be accepted and formalised there. So I'm happy to move we head into subcommittee. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Mia Walker. Are there any comments around that?
I do have
move forward.
Yeah, we can still move forward.
Yes, that we can still move forward, but
Yes.
I do have concerns about the public excluded item, and my concerns are around that. Our community's asked us to be open and transparent about terms of reference, and I'd like to understand before we go into a subcommittee why we would put this item into a PX.
Yeah, we're not quite there. We're just we're moving this item in subcommittee, and then when we get to that item, we can speak to it. So if you're happy, we move into subcommittee. All those who say aye.
Aye.
Agree. Thank you. Carried. So what we will do now, Mayor Hazelhurst, is on to the next item, which is publicly excluded. And what I'll do, Mr. Tate, is if you could introduce the item and the explanation of why we go into public excluded.
So thank you, Madam Chair. So look, really the rationale for going into public excluded was the basis that to provide the opportunity for what was free and frank conversation, and also to potentially protect the privacy of natural persons. Just again noting that this is the first time that the draft terms of reference and draft review framework have been formally presented to the JC for their initial feedback as draft. So look, certainly happy to take guidance from the table, but that was certainly the officer's recommendation to provide that opportunity for collective free and frank discussion. If there's not appetite to do that, then that's totally the will of the table. But yeah, certainly just recognising as well we've got steps to go through in terms of engaging with others, but again, happy to take the direction of the table.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Comments? Neil Walker.
I actually, through you, Madam Chair, I agree with Ms. Sandra that there is a very important public piece of discussing this terms of reference, but I do want to take on board the point that has been made from the officer's recommendation about protecting natural persons. So I think it would be good to continue the conversation about the process and the scope of the terms of reference, with us being mindful that if we get to the point where there is a natural persons needing to be protected, that we as the committee are mindful that we do have that opportunity to move into PX if required, and should take that responsibly.
Any other comment, consideration?
I'd like the recommendations through your chair brought back into a public part of the meeting, and that terms of reference are made public to the community.
Absolutely. You're suggesting today or at the next possible meeting?
So it's just understanding through your chair the stakeholder engagement and where we're at with that. But in terms of, we don't have a quorum now, so that's unfortunate. That, because I would like to think that we moved on with these terms of reference, and we've got a duty to get on with this whole process, and we owe it to the community who are suffering out there. So they want this review undertaken as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So I think that there isn't anything that that we need. For me, the terms of reference and the report is very clear. The stakeholder engagement we're not quite at yet, and understand that. But in terms of how we move forward, I believe that we can just get on with this today.
So we will be in subcommittee, so we will be able to move on in a subcommittee quorum state. But then what we'd have to do is reveal that in the next committee meeting, which we can call extraordinary, so we can fast track a next meeting to come up. And so, Mr. Tate, would you like to reply or respond to those concerns?
Again, through you, Madam Chair, look, again, really the rationale for public excluded was to provide the opportunity for the committee to have that discussion. So, again, if what I'm hearing is confidence that actually that discussion can happen in an open forum, then again, that was the advice that I was happy to provide at that time, on the basis that, again, committee members hadn't had the opportunity to obviously discuss what the conversation that we've just had. So, again, happy to take a lead from the table. So.
Any comment, Councillor Simpson?
No, I'm happy to have that discussion publicly.
Publicly? Okay. If there are any other comment? No, there are none. So what we will do, we'll continue in a public forum with this item, and proceeding in that way in a subcommittee state. So what we may do right now is take a cup of tea break, and we'll come back to this item in 5 minutes' time. Kia ora koutou. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Kia ora koutou, welcome back. We're going to continue with our next item. Could we please have Mr. Tate introduce it, and then possibly Ian to provide more information before we get into discussions. I know we have guests online, so thank you, Melinda. And do we have Jane as well? Or just Melinda? Just Melinda. Kia ora, Melinda. Welcome. Thank you. Doug, could you start us off?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So look, happy obviously to present the report and just welcoming Melinda Mead. So Melinda is one of two of the directors of Simplexity that are providing us with project management support for developing what is the terms of reference. And again, just noting in the earlier agenda, we've been really clear around what the roles are. So this isn't about delivering the review, this is about helping us to scope the review and be clear on what we want to achieve as a region from the review. So just noting Melinda, going to hand over to you very shortly, but just particularly noting the two recommendations that sit in the front of the report. So really that is that the Joint Committee are receiving what is the draft terms of reference and draft review framework as they currently are, and that's on the basis of reflecting the feedback that each of the individual members have provided to both Jane and Melinda over the last week and a bit in terms of the development of what has been the terms of reference to date. And also the second recommendation, just noting that now having kind of got to a point where from feedback today, we can then revisit the terms of reference and the draft review framework to provide that to TKO through Mr. Symes as co-chair of Matariki, who will lead, particularly with Mana Whenua, the overview and input into the review document as well, which is the process that we've agreed to. Again, look, I won't go over the phases. We've talked about those earlier, and I'll provide Melinda the opportunity to talk about that. But in particular, just want to touch on partnership with Mana Whenua, which we've heard all the way through. The response has been a really critical thing to get right from the word go, and we've heard that very, very early, and hence the necessity and the requirement to really make sure we get the terms of reference right, hence being the kind of the two-step stage we've got with TKO as well. So just want to note that, and recognising that at this point we haven't had full input from the wider TKO group at this point, primarily just Mr. Symes into the draft terms of reference. So just again want to specifically note that. But other than that, again, I've noted comments about earlier around timelines, and I think that's a good part of the discussion that we can have this morning as Melinda takes us through both the draft terms of reference. In particular, we will go through what are roles and responsibilities, and as well as kind of where consultation will start and won't stop, or will stop, I should say, or maybe proposed to stop, I should say, probably being clearer on that one. But just noting particularly bullet points 24 to 26 around just the financial and resource implications on that, and just noting that we haven't confirmed those at those points for the wider review. So just noting that as well. But on that, if you are happy, Madam Chair, I will pass over to Melinda.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Kia ora, Melinda.
Morena. Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this forum today and to present to you. Just to Doug, Mr. Tate has very kindly given a very good overview of where we're at with the draft terms of reference and supporting review framework. But just to highlight a few points, Simplexity have just been have provided these documents as a start point to undertake a review process. So the terms of reference and the review framework documents are draft. I'd just like to stress that they are draft. They aren't final documents, but they are very much based on what this forum and also executive and Mana Whenua have told us to date. I'd like to highlight that Mr. Tate has said that we've only had contact so far and a conversation with Mr. Symes, and there is still scheduled follow-up conversations with other members of TKO, and those conversations are scheduled for Monday. Key in the terms of references are the themes that have been brought out through those conversations that we've had with you, in particular around community, Mana Whenua, and response. So those key themes we've tried to thread through both documents, with the terms of reference being a higher level document with 6 outcomes as part of that document, and then the supporting framework document goes into more of that detail. And you'll see in particular in the framework document there is that the breakdown and the detail of what each of those outcomes mean, with focus and then criteria to support what that review should look like. In the terms of reference, we've tried to be very clear based on the conversations with you about the 3 levels of emergency management within Hawke's Bay. So that being the Hawke's Bay group, which Mr. Tate has spoken to, local authorities as part of that group, and also community. And we've been very clear with the conversations with you around what is in scope and what is out of scope in that document. There are a couple of key conversations to highlight, or a couple of areas to highlight for conversations with you today, to make sure that the review purpose is right, that the scope is right, both in and out of scope, the key deliverable, which of course would be a review report, and the governance structure to support the review process. The framework goes into more detail and does highlight that detail that stems from each of those outcomes as part of the terms of reference, but also highlights the numerous key stakeholders that should be involved as part of this review process. These documents are for you to have a conversation about now, and to look at the next steps with your review of these documents, what amendments might need to be made, what is appropriate and not, and then for your endorsement moving forward.
Thank you, Melinda. And look, we welcome your expertise into drafting these terms of reference thus far. I'd like to give the opportunity to Ian to make any introductory comments before we move to questions and considerations. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Look, I just want to start off by saying, and I remember saying this at one of our press conferences early on, which you were at, and I think there was a question about reviews very early on, and as the group, myself and the group office staff are all committed to a open and transparent and fair review, whatever that may be. Because this was a disaster, and by its very nature, our systems and processes are well and truly challenged. And I think because the emergency management system deals with emergencies and disasters, it has to be a learning system. And so I suppose all I would really like to see out of this review, and I'm not going to be intimately involved other than providing information and maybe being interviewed or whatever it is, by whoever the review panel is, but I think we just need to make sure that this is about continuous improvement of the system. Okay. It's not about apportioning blame, if I might put it in that way. And I think the tone of the review actually needs to reflect that. Yes. It is about how do we make this system better moving forward. So I have no other comments other than that, really. The only other thing, well, I've got the speaking stick, is that I just wonder where NEMA sits in this review, and Melinda, you may have a view on this, but I mean, I think it was a national state of emergency, and so NEMA in some way needs to be involved in this review. So I noticed that, yes, we have included our partner agencies, which is the emergency services. They're obviously conducting their own review, so it's going to be quite a complex review to undertake, because there's going to be multiple reviews done by multiple agencies and the councils, which are then going to have to feed into this. Absolutely. Along with the review of what we did at the GECC as well. So that's sort of where I'm at.
Thank you, Ian. Melinda, would you like to respond to, I suppose, the agility of what's scoped so far to allow the inclusion and connection of a possible national review or inquiry, as well as the Hawke's Bay Regional Council have just announced their independent flood protection assets review. And the terms of reference will be finessed and finalised in the next few weeks. So really it's your advice and opinion at this stage on the interconnecting reviews that can come above or to the side that can speak to this CDM review.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. First of all, in the framework document, we've been really clear in the first figure to highlight the independency of what might be happening at whole of government at NEMA level, as well as a review in the Hawke's Bay. But we have been really clear in that document that the Hawke's Bay review would be separate, understanding that we're not quite sure what is in place yet for that whole of government and NEMA level type reviews. But the report that's produced as part of this review framework, whoever does that, we would see would 100% feed into that NEMA and an all of government review. In the framework as well, and Mr. Tate has highlighted a series of phases, which we've outlined. One of those phases, the next step would be to, gather those reviews and reports as part of, other reviews that are undertaken within the Hawke's Bay. So I can see that the Regional Council review would potentially feed into this review if that was appropriate. So there's a mechanism for that if that was the case. I don't know, Mr. Tate might have another comment as well, but that's, overarching how we designed the framework and each of the phases.
Yeah,
Mr.
great.
Tate.
And just again through you, Madam Chair, so in terms of the conversations that I've had with Roger Ball from NEMA, again, like very clear, and we mentioned it in the earlier reports, there's going to need to be a very kind of clear integration, but being very clear that this is our regional review, this isn't a NEMA review, and so we will clearly set the terms of reference. But also noting, and probably to the points that we've heard earlier from the discussion as well around the need to try and coordinate as best we can where the local input and local feedback connects back into the regional review as well, so that's not lost as part of the lessons learned. So probably one of the most critical things that this next phase will need to consider is particularly the timing of that, recognising that everybody will be doing local reviews and their own reviews of their organisations, whether that's just simply hot reviews or more detailed reviews of their own responses for their own respective organisations. So that will be some of the challenges that we will have around timing as well for how fulsome the regional review is and the timing for that as well. So that's part of just recognising the pace that we are working with. That's still, and again, for most organisations, recovery planning is where the majority of the emphasis is going rather than necessarily immediately looking back as well. So just trying to get that balance right as well.
Thank you. And I agree that the timing and the coordination is very important, but also the clarity and difference between each review, who's responsible, what it is actually looking at and providing findings and learnings. So I think we need to be very clear about that, also knowing that they do have to speak to each other because, our community are expecting answers and they may not exactly know where to go to get those answers. And so part of when we communicate these reviews out to our community members is to also clearly communicate the role or responsibility of each of the reviews and where they can speak to and get their effective voice heard, knowing that there's clarity between the different reviews that are going on. Just moving forward into the item, do our members have questions, concerns, considerations? Mayor Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Melinda and Jane, for the work you've done with our coordinating executive and the team to get to this point, and for taking the time to talk to us individually as well. I've got kind of a number of things, but I'm going to start with a really specific thing, which is about what's in scope and what's out of scope, and this regional versus local, which I think how I'm reading this is actually confused in here already, and that is between page 11 of our report, which is page 3 of the terms of reference. The second bullet point from the top of the page talks about what's in scope and says the effectiveness of community level support through both formal response arrangements and informal community networks and the contributions these had on community wellbeing. So that's in scope, but then over the page there is a out of scope, which is about direct engagement with affected communities to go through local authorities. And when you actually go to the out of scope in the engagement framework, it actually really specifically says something about not engaging with community voices. So we've already got confusion as to who's going to take responsibility for. The out of scope in the engagement one is on page 19 or page 5 of the engagement framework, which says individual and partner agency response actions as part of the response are out of scope. So we've already got confusion about what's in and out between local, regional and community engagement and who does what.
Would you like to comment on that, Melinda, around the differences?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mayor Walker, for those comments. I will go back and check, because what we have tried to do is make sure there was consistency between both documents, but you've highlighted that potentially there is not. So we will go back and review and check to make sure that there is 100% consistency with both documents. The community piece, we wanted to focus on the systems and processes that supported the community response. So that was the intent behind the community piece. Also, we were very mindful of community engagement that was already being undertaken as part of the recovery process, and we didn't want to duplicate engagement with communities that potentially was already being undertaken, and the work that was being done by local recovery efforts and those locality plans which were already being put in place to support communities. So we were very mindful of that piece that was ongoing as well.
Mr. Bickle?
Probably related to this, I think one of the things that's going to be really important for the communities that were most directly impacted from this is having a voice in the review. And I'm just wondering how this is going to fit together if it's not done in a standard, in a kind of standard framework and methodology. I think that one of the questions I've got about scope, and I know it's a bit chicken and egg, but fundamentally before you get to response, there's a question about readiness, and readiness at both the systems level and an individual level. So, I've got some questions that I think I've raised about, from a readiness point of view. We've done things around tsunami and earthquakes, but did we actually have a plan around a flood, event? Have we tested that at a system level? Did we have any plans around flood events? Because that becomes the basis on which communities and the systems kind of ready to respond in terms of judging the response. And I know just from a number of the affected communities in Hastings, some of the things that they want to be able to feed into this review are the things that happened on the day. Like, we didn't know where to go in the flood. We tried to get out of our community and we were sent back into our community because it wasn't safe to cross the bridge. And I'm sort of wondering how those things will be, captured in the, again, in a constructive way from a learning point of view, because I think that those are some of the fundamental questions at both the system and the community and the individual level.
Yeah, those are great points.
Yeah, maybe just I think probably what we're hearing is there needs, just through you, Madam Chair, probably some further clarification around, in particular, where the work that's being completed at a recovery locality planning work, where we've had some guidance from the Regional Recovery Agency as well. So that's, I think, probably the feedback that I'm hearing and with Belinda as well, is about being clear about where those boundaries are starting and stopping, which is will need to again be refined as we go through. Probably, I think what would be particularly helpful for the conversation is to try and again, may well be that we need to go away and do that homework first. But what I'm hearing really clearly is there's expectation around the table, regardless, that there is a high level of community engagement. And again, it's whether that needs to occur at both the regional level and a local level, or we can potentially just capture that at a local level. So I think that's where we've some more work that we've got to do to be clear about that as well. And when we are seeking feedback at a regional level, it's being clear about what that feedback is actually about. Which, again, we've had the conversation earlier today about who is group and who is civil defence, and the part of the challenge is that we are all civil defence, and we all play different roles as part of what is the group. So I think that's just a challenge that we have as we try and refine and define kind of the roles, and in particular who we're engaging with and on what. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Alex Walker.
On that point, I think if we go back to what the role of the group is around coordination and clarity of process and connection between the different parties. I think where we're grappling with this is, to be honest, it's probably not about whether we do it as a group or is it local, is that as a region, we don't have a clear set of information that tells a clear narrative and chain of events of what happened in the 24 hours before and the 20 to 48 hours after, to allow us to understand how to review whether we did coordinate in the way that we needed to. And I wonder whether that's where some of that community network voice is actually really important, because even in my community, I would need to go to someone in Porongaho to say, well, when did the river first end up on the main street, and when did people start evacuating, and who helped them? And I think we've all got those pieces of that picture. If we don't understand that, we're not going to be able to understand whether we did the right job, the best job we could, and what we can learn how to do better coordination.
Absolutely.
And that's where the community voice is really important for me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Melinda, I just want to note that you're capturing some of this to start reshaping the scope, and that you're understanding some of those comments. So yeah, just nod when you. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm taking some notes. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think connected with this is an understanding of expectations. I was going to raise this during our discussion around outcomes, but I think now is the right time to do it. We can do, and I think it has to be a parallel stream, is one around the sequence of events and the concerns that are raised by the community through the sequence of events. But I think more importantly, we can either continue to look backwards or we can look forward. And one of the opportunities we have in this, unlike any exercise that's ever been done in the past, everybody in our community experiences events, so they all have an opinion. They also have expectations. So this review could present for us an opportunity to clarify expectations, because there are many people that think civil defence should be doing this or the local government should be doing that. But are they realistic expectations? So I think there's an opportunity here to say, what is it that our community expects, and then who or which is the appropriate agency or location, i.e. level, does that expectation sit with? And that then provides for us benchmarking for our forward planning, business activities, etc., based on the experiential learnings that our community have had. But I think we have to look forward and say this is our opportunity, as Ian has said, for continuous learning. But it's unless, and why is this the best opportunity? Because we're going to appoint an independent group to look at this review and provide us some guidance. And I think they are the best group, if we get the right expertise around the table, to say to us, you had this range of expectations, some well-placed and some not so well-placed, this is your opportunity to refine community's expectations, and these are the expectations you can then live up to going forward. And I think that provides us our greatest outcome from this whole experience.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Some wise words. So that's an additional outcome you'd like to see?
No, I think it's sticking, within the scope, and it's also sticking within the number of outcomes. But what I'd be suggesting when we talk about outcomes is an alteration to the outcomes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair. I have some concerns about a scope, and I think that we've got an opportunity to do this once and do it well and make sure that everybody's at the table. And that is our fire and emergency partners, our surf life-saving partners, our police partners, and everybody feeds in. And rather than, yes, everyone will undertake their own operational performance, of course, but how we feed that into the overwhelming well-being of our community's needs. And last night I was at a meeting with 80 impacted families who had their first meeting last night, and just to hear them being able to have someone to listen to their stories of what happened to them. So while we're thinking about locality plans or community recovery plans, we have a lot of people are still very much in response, and they still haven't cleared the silt from under their homes, and they're still asking questions about are they going to get their insurance, and how's this going to work out for them. I think that we need to make sure that we are able to give people the opportunity to be able to share their story and be able to feed this information. So we've heard from the Search and Rescue of New Zealand Surf Lifesaving, and we've heard there, and they need to be part of this because they did an incredible job rescuing 250 people in the first day or so. And so, where are they in this whole sort of partner-agency relationship? So there are so many people that need to be connected, and I just think we can't look at this in isolation. The community expects us to have a review of the operation that makes up civil defence, and I think it's critical that we bring all the agencies to the table and say, what are your timeframes? How does this feed into the overall review? I don't think we can all work in isolation here because we're all part of this response team, and I think it's critical that community have the opportunity to feed in. I didn't know when the waterways burst in Havelock North at what time until last night. I didn't know how that all worked. So, we're still learning after 10.5 weeks what actually happened to community on the day. And they want to be able to share that. So we can actually look at how we manage all those parts of our region.
Yeah. Thank you, Mia. Melinda, would you like to comment further? Because I see it feature in terms of local authorities and partners in this scope. But could you elaborate further based on Mayor Hazelhurst's comments on, where's that brought to life and how is that connected through the framework?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. First of all, the comment about community, and I hear it loud and clear around the community piece and that community voice. I believe that through Mr. Tate we'll need to do some more work to make sure that we do the right thing by that community voice. So sort of hearing communities, but then what are we going to do about that? So to me, it very strongly needs to link to the recovery piece in a review. We don't just want to highlight community stories and then not highlight what we're doing about it. So that interconnection with what's happening with recovery, I think, is really important. So there definitely needs to be more work in that space. I don't think the last thing that we're very mindful of, and both myself and Jane Rowland had some conversations with some recovery specialists, is not wanting to re-traumatise communities as well. So we're very mindful of that piece as well. With reference to other agencies, 100%. All agencies that were involved in the response should feature as part of this review, whether it's including featuring as part of the feedback for this review, and as well as what hot debriefs or what reviews they undertake to feed into as well. So it's the engagement for the review with agencies, I believe, is twofold. It's that direct engagement as part of the review process, and also making sure that any reviews or hot debriefs are considered as well. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Melinda. Councillor Simpson, would you like to address the outcomes you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, so in looking at the proposed outcomes, there are 6, and I believe 6 is a good number. No other reason than 6 is a good number. But I just see some duplication with outcome 1 and outcome 3, because they're all about operational capability. Or both are about operational capability. So I would be suggesting combining those 2 outcomes into one and introducing a new outcome, which would be our first outcome, which is understanding expectation. And then we can set some outcomes, some measures against the expectations, how we collect expectations, how we consider expectations, and how we determine what and where expectations should sit going forward as being outcome 1, and then use that set of measures as an opportunity to look at the other 5 outcomes.
Thank you. Any comment on those suggestions, Mayor Walker?
Nigel, when we talk about the outcomes around what are people's expectations, that's a future-looking sense. Is it meaning you're trying to gauge what people's expectations are going to be of the group and of the coordination of the group in the future?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think it's, did people have expectations before the event?
Yeah.
And were those expectations realised? And does that influence how they feel about response or the response that was provided? And then the second one is looking at their expectations. Have their expectations changed? And does that influence what we should be seeking to achieve going forward?
Mr. Tate.
Yes. So thank you, Madam Chair. So almost what I'm kind of hearing is almost a reconfirming or a level of service check-in with community around the level of service that they expect for the future from what is group and what is civil defence. And I think that's probably particularly the language that I'm hearing about how the next steps and what the longer term implications of the review could inform as well. So.
Yep. Mayor Alex Walker?
I'm good.
You're good?
I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Okay, so these
It's taking me a minute.
the expectation part. And then Mr. Tate, could you maybe just elaborate on the combining of outcome 1 and 3, or possibly Melinda? Any comment on that?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to. Again, I think probably from here we'll just keep writing and capturing feedback as we go, and
Yes.
Certainly put some thought to that. Yeah, but certainly happy to continue receiving the feedback. It's really beneficial.
So through you, Madam Chair, and I think just to finish off the outcomes, using the independent review group is the ideal opportunity to establish reasonable expectations going forward and where they fall, to ensure that our community can be better informed around how that would operate. In other words, again, it's about setting up for success rather than having community have expectations that will and truly exceed what are, this body's belief around what expectations should be.
Melinda, would you like to comment around fair, reasonable, and where that's captured, how that's captured amongst this draft terms of reference?
Through you, Madam Chair, first of all, the point around the combining of outcome 1 and 3, I can see that that's reasonable. And what we wanted to make sure we did was, highlight what the current systems and processes were, but also highlighted those pockets of excellence and things that happened organically as part of the response and happened because of what might have been happening, whether it be at regional or local or community level at those times. So we wanted to highlight both those aspects. We can certainly combine both those outcomes, but noting that the focus and then the criteria makes that outcome quite a big one as part of the review process. In regards to the expectation, both current and future for community and beyond, that's one that we haven't included, but we can include that if that's something that this committee would like to see included.
Mayor Alex Walker.
I think Sandra, did you want to go?
Just picking up, through your chair, picking up on that point about community inclusiveness. We have now stood up a regional affected residents community panel, and I think that given that they've been at all of our community meetings and are standing up representing each area, I think it'd be really helpful to have the initial conversation with the panel to understand what their views are in terms of engagement and connections with the community. I think that they're representing a group of our affected residents, and they would, they'd be welcome to be part of this whole framework.
Thank you. Great suggestion. Thank you. Mayor Alex Walker.
I think this mapping of the expectations piece is important to get a sense of the judgment on the outcome, to be honest, of the first one about capability and capacity to coordinate, because that's our understanding of the role of the group. But is it the community's understanding of the role of the group? I think it is connected. And I think maybe it's incorporating the words about expectations into that outcome, because outcome 3, that emerging practice is not just limited to group, and I would be concerned when we put that together that we actually lose the emphasis on community level innovation that happened and is going to continue to happen, is my sense based on the conversations I've had in my community. So I wonder whether we bring the expectations into that first part, outcome 1, rather than having its own one, so it becomes a function of testing the capability and capacity to coordinate of the group, separate, directly related to that. But then that emerging practice piece, which is actually really about the key learnings, is still protected as being quite a very important bit. Because that outcome 3 is the bit that's going to inform the future of civil defence and emergency management in New Zealand, actually, because that's where the new nuggets of gold come from.
Absolutely. Thank you for that suggestion. Yep. Right. Well, moving forward, I think we've had some great discussion around the first few pages of the review, draft terms of reference. Now, are there any other further discussions to be had, particularly around so the engagement and the framework and engagement plan? Now, is that a separate piece that wants to be presented on, Mr. Tate?
I might defer to Melinda for this one, if that's okay. I think where we've probably landed is based on the conversation we're going to need to go back and do some more work on that. I think it's probably
Thank you.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Kia ora, we've got Denise join us. Kia ora, Denise from Wairoa.
Kia ora. Sorry. I would have come in earlier, but I'm at home trying to move silt. But 100%
understandable. You've joined us halfway or most of the way through the item.
Okay.
Lovely to have you. Thank you, Denise. Are there any other comments, questions on this item? Yes.
I told you I had lots of things. I'm sorry. I'm just getting into some of the more detailed nitty-gritty about the outcomes and the criteria that are in the scope. I just had a couple of other things to add in. One of them around outcome 1, which is appropriate capability and capacity to coordinate. and there's quite a long list of bullet points to be considered for that outcome. There was just a couple I'd like to raise as other thinking points. One of them is relationship with governance and regional leaders with the group. It's something we've looked at in the past, in past reviews. I think it would be helpful to continue that narrative around how do we get that right. The second one was, how do we ensure that these criteria also maintain a people focus, because process ultimately is for the benefit of people, to make sure we get that there. And I've got 4, so that's 2. The third one is the consistency between civil defence group and emergency services when it comes to planning, prioritising and operationalising. I think there are some pieces in here, but that we're hearing different stories about what happened between emergency services on the day before and the day after compared to what we knew through civil defence and emergency management. I think it would be helpful to clarify that. And the fourth one being understanding the benefits of GECC coordination across the different parts of the region, and where benefits lay when it came to that regional coordination.
Thank you. Very good points that are noted and be drawn into the scope. Thank you. Into the outcomes section. Are there any comments on those additions? Very supportive, but they all make sense. So thank you, Mia. And more further to go.
In the engagement framework on page 26 of the report, about the people that are part of group and part of that engagement work, we're missing Tihei Modi Order. We're probably missing MSD from a welfare and housing perspective, and also Te Puni Kōkiri, who played a pretty important part of supporting coordination of iwi partners. And picking up on Ms. Sandra's point, we're probably also missing the surf lifesaving rōpū, who were also vital. They arrived in Waipawa as well. When Waipawa was underwater, they arrived with their boats to come and help rescue people as well, so that they had quite a wide impact.
Thank you for picking those up. Have we noticed any other agencies, organisations, partners missing from that list?
Through you, Madam Chair, yeah, I think MB and the Ministry of Ed are actually missing from the list of agencies that we should communicate with.
Yeah, engage with, yes.
If we want to not blow out the extent of the people who this review is going to touch point with, there is probably also an opportunity, if we want an additional community lens, is the fire service have what they call a local liaison committee or advisory group, I think, which is a range of community representatives that advise them on their operational plans and activities. They're a disciplined group. I know it's just been reformed at the moment. There's an opportunity to perhaps to get a community lens from them as to how things went or didn't go, but it gives us a smaller group rather than in an existing group, rather than having to go and find another community group to try and work with.
Yeah. Thank you. Any further questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I just think that we've discussed this in the past prior to the cyclone, but having a mana whenua representative on this committee is critical, and in terms of, making sure the voice is here in partnership throughout. And I just wonder if we've done anything more to, I know we've identified that, but I don't think that we just need to think about that now in terms of the group and this committee, and how we make sure that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe it's a historical want and need. And the conversation of late that has been had with the TKO chair, Leon Symes, is providing the opportunity to be a part of this joint committee. And at this stage, it was seen as more effective in their role at this stage to be part of the review, which is why we are making sure that TKO through Leon is a part of the next phase of this draft terms of reference. And so that's the thought there, and the conversation has been had. But what I will stress to have a further conversation with him is to re-offer that and say, in what capacity are you now, is the group now able to join this joint committee? Ongoing conversation, absolute want by this committee, and full invitation, open invitation for that to happen, based on their capacity at this stage. Yeah.
I think just through you, Chair, seeing the significant role of both devastation and stand-up leadership from our hapu and marae communities has been exceptional, and I think that I would value their input into this process at this table. So if we could pass that on to Leon, I think it's critical at this stage.
Absolutely, thank you. Edie.
Kia ora, Chair. Perhaps just to add to that, unlike perhaps partner agencies or local government, mana whenua, whether it's Leon or others, are not actually funded to participate in these discussions moving forward. And I just want to sort of add that, yes, absolutely, but we need to recognise that they are not funded, unlike other partner agencies, in terms of these discussions moving forward.
Absolutely.
So through you, Chair, we need to address that.
Yes.
We just make sure that happens. That's
in two ways, I think. In two ways. One is when we work around what is the cost and increases we need to operate the group, but also in terms of the resourcing required to do the review.
Thank
Two
you.
parts.
We'll take that away and work on that. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Tate.
Maybe just a question back to the table a little bit around on page 12 of the agenda, just any initial guidance ahead of a conversation with TK around what the review advisory group, just any potential thoughts on formation of that? Appreciate I've putting you on the spot a little bit, and happy to take feedback on that later. So that's in the terms of reference, point 5 under project governance. We've identified a review advisory group, which talks about its membership to be confirmed. That is on page 11 of the agenda. Again, happy to just leave that line, but if there was any kind of general feedback or direction from the table in terms of the potential makeup of that to help us kind of inform that in a bit more of a fuller content.
Comments? Thank you, Mr. Simpson.
Through you, Madam Chair, Kirsten, Mayor Wise and I have had a discussion around potential candidates for that, but I don't think it's appropriate to discuss that in public.
Not at this stage, no.
But we've had some thoughts on that. Yep.
Yeah. So your general acceptance of the framework in that part. Thank you. Mayor Hazelhurst.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I support an advisory group, and could we make sure we have someone from the affected residents panel on that group who are very proactive in finding some solutions for us.
Thank you. Mayor Walker.
Why do we need one?
Mr. Tate.
Thank you. And again, I'm happy to defer through to Melinda as well. But at this point, it was about being able to give some capacity to what is already full diaries for a number of people, but also to just provide really another means to provide community input and just wider stakeholder input as well with partner agencies into the review. So again, Melinda, happy to take kind of further feedback from you, but that's my understanding of what we are seeking from that advisory group. So,
through you, Madam Chair, just to add on to what Mr. Tate has said, we heard really loud and clear when the conversations about the need for an advisory group as part of the governance. Again, with the appropriate membership of that group to be decided, and again to add that layer of independence and transparency to the review process. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mayor Walker.
I understand they're trying to bring the other parties' views in, but we already coordinate this group. We already coordinate other groups. We already have a coordinating executive group. We have our emergency services groups that come together. And just unless we've kind of got a plan that we're going to pick someone from each of those groups to come together into a different group, I just think we're opening a can of worms in terms of how do we scope up who's going to represent and be needed on another group, because we've got lots of groups. I don't want to add burden when it's not necessary. Is it not possible for that sponsored group to be the coordinating executive group or something that looks like that?
Yeah, that's an alternative. Would you like to comment?
We'll certainly take that feedback away and
Thank you.
Yeah.
Try to make sure we get the community. There's a community and services piece in here as well, but let's just try and not make this too hard.
No, totally with you.
Yeah.
Mr. Tate, would you like to explain possibly the weaknesses of an advisory group in terms of the process and the timing? Not the weaknesses, but you know, we've all heard that timing's important, that community voice and input's important. So it is really finding a sweet spot, if I put it that way, around timing, resourcing, but ensuring voices are captured.
Completely well answered question. Thank you. Agreed. Yeah. So happy to. I think we need to probably just go away and have a bit more of a think at both a KEG level as well, and happy to take any further feedback again, particularly around TKO, around how we may kind of work through kind of what that engagement process with them looks like as well. So
Yeah.
And
I think the conversations that you'll have with Leon Symes, you may be able to get direction there that is worthwhile in terms of their capacity and being involved in this process. Kia ora. Mr. Simpson?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we saw that advisory group as being a higher level group. We saw it as being the independence of the review. That was our position on it anyway, with the intent being that we needed people that could look at the results of the review and make determinations that could then provide us that independent view as to have we got this right or not going forward. We didn't see it as being a big group either.
Yeah. Melinda, would you like to comment a bit further, given the suggestions that have been put here around that advisory group?
Through you, Madam Chair, given that the structure that was that we've suggested is around governance, I agree with the comments made by Mr. Simpson. It was seen as a higher level advisory group with a small number of key representatives at that higher level to make sure, as outlined in the responsibilities, that review and the overall review focus was still appropriate and on track and considering all the right components for the review. So it was that higher level advisory group and some of those, the other community representation would be in other parts of that engagement plan and process.
Thank you. Any other comment?
I support the independence of this advisory group because, you know, we will all undertake reviews of our management and our response. And so I think that, and, you know, what we've seen now is we've seen community have stood up and wanting to be in this role. And I think it's an opportunity for that independence. And I think that given that some, you know, the community may see us with conflict because we're all part of the civil defence response and recovery. And when I look at the enormity of our workload at the moment, as we still, you know, a foot in each in response and both in recovery and having some independence and some independent eyes across this who are connected, I think it'd be helpful actually. I do.
Okay, and I think this calls for as much independence as we see fit and is appropriate for the impact that it's had on our communities. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments in terms of this item? There are none. Thank you. Oh, Kia ora, Denise.
Hi. Hey, look, sorry for coming in halfway through, but the advisory group, when you talk higher level, what sort of membership, like, what do you mean by higher level advisory to oversee that CDM is doing the job properly? What are the sort of people that you're looking for that?
Membership.
Yeah.
Mr. Tate?
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, probably a combination of the ability to kind of look holistically, I think, across all of the region. I think that's going to be important. The ability to be able to speak again for communities kind of Inc. But I think probably more so, and again, probably when we talk about a higher level, again, that community ultimately has confidence in the individuals that are on that group, that they are able to have an appropriate level of transparency and accountability to their own community of Hawke's Bay, that when people look to them, yeah, they can see themselves reflected in that group. So you know, whether it's higher level or you know, just people that we hold in high esteem and high value, that would probably be the idea that we can respectfully and see ourselves reflected in those individuals, and we have trust and confidence in their ability to, again, give us all trust and confidence. So,
Thank you, Mr. Tate.
Okay, thank you. That that for me.
Thank you, Denise. If there are no other questions or comments, we can move through this item, and thank you all for your contribution, substantial contribution into reshaping and finessing this draft terms of reference. So next steps, Mr. Tate, would you like to try and round us off there?
great, thank you. So in the benefits of trying to move with pace as well and keep everything lined up. So look, from here, I'll do a bit of a wrap up with Melinda and the wider team just to make sure we've kind of captured everything. Look, there's obviously some natural feedback loops back to the joint committee, but also to TKO. We've got some other partners as well that we need to connect in with as well. So we've already done some calls earlier last week as well around the KEG, which did involve partners like MSD and FENS and Police and others, Te Whatu Ora, and a number of other agencies. But look, there will be others that will naturally have wider inputs as well. So whether that's Māori Wardens or MB or MOE, which we've noted as well. So everybody has played a big input into that. But certainly, look, we'll go back through, we will review timelines, we will, again, just try and get a bit of practical reality around what we can achieve, noting the comments that we've had around the table. Everybody is busy, everybody is tapped, and just making sure that actually we are balancing keeping people's needs still front and centre, but also looking back to make sure we're keeping the lessons learned for the future front and centre as well. So I haven't given you specifics on that for a kind of a good reason, but just need, certainly, I understand as KEG chair, and I think again around the table and for Melinda and everybody else, we understand the importance for people to be able to have their say and to move on really from this event into structured and confident space for the future in terms of recovery. So, message loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tate. Are there any further comments before we move the item with the suggestions taken on board? So we've got recommendations 1 and 2. I call on a mover and a seconder of those. Thank you, Mayor Hazelhurst, and a seconder, Councillor Simpson. Would you like to make any comments before we move through the motions?
Yes.
Oh.
I'd just like to acknowledge the enormity of the work and the independence and respectfulness for our communities, and as they heal and as they move forward. So I think that this is a really important piece of work for our community, and while it's important for all of us to learn for the future, it's been able to, for community to be able to understand what's going on and how we do this and how we do it well for the future. So this is about learning, it's about being respectful, and this is about recognising and acknowledge the the trauma and tragedy that our community have experienced through the devastation of Cyclone Gabrielle. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr Simpson?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I concur with Mayor Hazelhurst's views and the views that have been expressed around the table. I think this is an important piece of work. I think it will provide us a good lead as to where we go in the future, and I think it's important that we see that we have had a very unique experience. There are people in our community that are only now realising the devastation that this experience is having on not only their lives but their livelihoods. And I think that pain is becoming more real. And I think if we can get this activity right going forward, we can provide reassurance to our communities that improvements will always be a success formula. And while we're looking for improvement, I think they will come on the journey with us with offering successful outcomes. And I think that's the importance of this piece of work.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Walker?
Very wisely said, and I would add that part of the message that we've been talking about in Central Hawke's Bay, we've just had 10 community corridor meetings around the district, and part of how I set the frame for those meetings has been that this cyclone happened across the whole of the region, but it happened differently everywhere. And actually it happened to people at a local level, in their homes at a local level, in their businesses at a local level. And the impacts were local and the recovery will be local. And it's about our people first and foremost. And because of that, we have to make sure that nobody across our system makes assumptions about what happened to others and about what coordination and support those from the very far north to the very far south, from the west to the east, across the whole of the region, that we don't make assumptions about what happened to other people. And very clearly from those 10 community conversations that we've had, our community have been asked what are the lessons that we all need to learn to move forward. Many of them understand that there are lessons for us in civil defence. They've got some very wise things to offer, and as Nigel has said, they want to be involved and they want to better understand how to be involved and how they connect into a system that they have felt disconnected from. And so if we can bring that kind of learning into this review that's going to strengthen our whole community, then I think we're on the right track. So I think our terms of reference and the work we've done so far are getting us there. And in the next week or two, as we finalise these changes and moves to it so that we can get going, I think will be a great step forward for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Denise, would you like to comment?
I mean, I agree with Sandra and Mayor Alex and Mr. Tate. I can't. And I guess you're right, Alex, it has impacted on communities differently. And I think the well-being of the people cannot be underestimated, because it's going to be a long journey. And we have to keep checking up and making sure people are okay, because it's not easy and it won't be easy. But we've got to come back bigger and better and more resilient. And losing our road between Wairua and Napier has had a huge impact on people who have whānau in the bay, but also who need those health services and have been pretty stressed about not being able to get to their appointments and their specialists. So the journey is far from over. And we just need to be mindful of the people who have been impacted and to check in on their well-being all the way through this journey. Yeah. Thank you.
Kia ora, Denise. And total ko your kōrero. and everyone else's input into this today, into this item, and it is a significant piece of work that we're undertaking here. It's going to take enormous effort and energy, not just from the people around this table, but our community who have been impacted. You started us, Denise. But this is about our people, and we need to do this together. And this is a phase of our recovery that we need to go through with our people. So on that, Koto, thank you very much for your input into this piece of work. And we've started the path. We're going to come back and be able to produce a final terms of reference that our community can be assured that they have their input on and into. So with that, I put those recommendations on the table. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora koutou. On that, could I please just go back to our first item and have that moved, seconded and passed because we weren't in subcommittee then. Mayor Hazelhurst, if I can have you move and Mayor Walker to second that first item. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou katoa. So we do have a public excluded item, the minutes from the last meeting to confirm. So if we could please move into public excluded. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair,
Yes.
will we also discuss the opportunities around makeup of the review group?
We might